Welcome back to Amerisogyny. I'm your host, Hannah Blue. You're listening to episode 68, The Hypocrisy of Hate. Hello, listeners. Do I have an episode for you? No, hypocrisy. We all know what that is, right? Well, we're going to get into it, especially as it relates to politics. Now, let me make this clear. Amerisogyny is not a political podcast. However, since we are so close to the presidential election, I feel it is my duty to talk about some things, especially things that have happened right here in this state, North Carolina. I'm going to give you some bits of U.S. history, and we'll also talk about book banning. And speaking of books, before I get started, my debut novella, Platerius Infiltration, Book 1, is available for pre-order on Amazon, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, and more. Reserve your copy today. I'm telling you, you won't be disappointed. Also, visit my website, dlhannah.com, and sign up to my VIP list. I'm working on bonus content and promotional freebies to give anyone who signs up. Platerius Infiltration is the first book in a trilogy that I wrote. And let me spell it for you so you can find it, especially if you're outside of the United States. It is Platerius Infiltration. Now, we're going to get into book banning a little later, but for now, let's get ready for our first stop, North Carolina. Mark Robinson is running for governor in North Carolina. What a disgusting piece of trash. According to CNN, he has called himself a black Nazi. Mark Robinson is the poster child for what's done in the dark will come to light. Allegedly, some years ago, he enjoyed posting on a porn forum. The site is called Nude Africa, and his username is Mini Soldier. Now, he's mad with CNN, claiming that what they reported is false, but somebody did their homework, because the same phrases he used on Nude Africa were also used on his Facebook page. Yeah, he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, is he? Let me give you some examples. On Nude Africa, allegedly, he posted, "I don't give a frog's fat ass," where that video came from. And apparently he can't write either. On Facebook, he posted, "I really don't give a frog's fat behind who Serena Williams married." And CNN found more similarities between Nude Africa and his Facebook page. "Don't give two shakes," "gag a maggot," and "dunderhead." What an idiot. Either he wasn't smart enough to hide the way he spoke, or he never thought he'd get caught. And that's not all. In October 2010, he declared, "I'm a black Nazi." That same month, he wrote, allegedly, "Slavery is not bad. Some people need to be slaves. I wish they would bring slavery back. I would certainly buy a few." In March of 2012, he wrote that he preferred Adolf Hitler over Barack Obama. Allegedly, he wrote, "I'd take Hitler over any of the SHIT that's in Washington right now." Also, in October of 2011, Robinson allegedly slammed Dr. Martin Luther King. He called him a commie, said he was worse than a maggot, and called him a huckster. There were also slurs against Muslims and gay people. Now, I already didn't like Robinson. What he feels about abortion is absolutely sickening. In his own words, Robinson said abortion is not about protecting women's bodies. It's about killing the child because you weren't responsible enough to keep your skirt down. But 30 years ago, his wife had an abortion. So what was it? She couldn't keep her skirt down? Clearly, Robinson hates women, and he doesn't care if a woman gets pregnant by a rapist. He feels she should be forced to bear the child. Well, those comments made on Nude Africa have come back to bite him, because at least 3 GOP governors have pulled their support. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, and Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin have all said they'll no longer support Robinson after these inflammatory comments went viral. And the Republican Governors Association won't give Robinson any more money for ads. Robinson called teachers wicked people, but get this. Allegedly, he said he enjoyed watching transgender porn. That's the whole basis of today's episode, the hypocrisy. What many of these politicians say in public are not what they think behind closed doors, and Mark Robinson is one of them. Even a few Republicans in North Carolina have placed distance between themselves and Robinson, and he didn't attend a rally for former President Trump. And several of Robinson's top staff have resigned from their positions. That includes his campaign manager, deputy campaign manager, finance director, and general consultant. Now, for me, the writing is on the wall for Robinson, but he's so thick-headed he won't pull out of the race. I'm not surprised. He's scary and twisted and sick. He's not the only conservative who thinks that way. There's no way I'd vote for him, and I think anyone who does is just as crazy as he is. And I said what I said. And speaking of crazy, let's get ready for our next stop, Louisiana. Clay Higgins is a GOP congressman for the state of Louisiana, and he posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, calling Haitian migrants thugs and slapstick gangsters who needed to get their ASSES out of our country. This is the rhetoric from conservatives. They actually believe that people who look like them are the sole owners of the United States, and that is not the case. They do not own this country. It belongs to all of us. Native Americans, Black Americans, Asian Americans, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans. Yeah, this country belongs to all of us. Now, if you're living outside of the U.S. and you don't know, let me enlighten you. When conservatives use the term thugs, it's racist. It's a fancier way of saying the N-word. And for the ignorant people who say, well, don't Black people call themselves thugs? Didn't they start using that word? Shut up. Let me explain for you. Ignorant people call themselves and others thugs. It has to do with ignorance, not color. Thank you, and you're welcome. Now, after he posted this, the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Stephen Horsford, called for him to be investigated. And he also wanted Higgins to be censored over his comments. Hakeem Jeffries, who is the House Minority Leader, believes Higgins should be removed from the task force that's investigating the assassination attempts against Trump. And I agree with him. He says, the statement by Congressmember Clay Higgins was disgusting and dangerous. It's questionable as to why someone so irresponsible like Clay Higgins could be put on a serious task force that is investigating the work of the Secret Service. Now, Higgins took the post down. And of course, GOP leaders are protecting him because that's what they do. Higgins isn't backing down on what he said. Allegedly, Higgins prayed about the comments, then removed the post. But here's what he said after that meaningful prayer. I'm being sarcastic here. He said, it's all true. I can put up another controversial post tomorrow if you want me to. I mean, we do have freedom of speech. I'll say what I want. It's not a big deal to me. It's like something stuck to the bottom of my boot. Just scrape it off and move on with my life. House Speaker Mike Johnson is lying out of his behind, trying to say that Higgins did regret the post. He said, look, he was approached on the floor by colleagues who said it was offensive. He went to the back. I just talked to him about it. He said he went to the back and he prayed about it and he regretted it and he pulled the post down. That's what you want the gentleman to do. I'm sure he probably regrets some of the language he used, but we move forward. We believe in redemption around here. What a crock of you know what. And I'm trying to watch my mouth because my friend Miss Connie is a minister and she doesn't want me cussing. But this is a crock. The man said he has free speech and he'll put up another post. Higgins represents conservatives. This is what they say behind closed doors, in the comfort of their homes and offices and churches. This is the rhetoric they feed each other. The issue is he said it out loud. But notice the take from GOP. He said it out in the open and they're glazing over it. For conservatives, making racial remarks isn't the issue. You know what the enemy is for conservatives? Books. Learning the true history of the United States. They don't mind upholding hate, intolerance, and injustices. But it's nothing for them to dismantle knowledge, the right to be educated. Clay Higgins is a sick POS. A lot of them are. I've said on this podcast, I am a liberal, but I'm not a blind liberal. I call out corruption and hypocrisy on both sides. And Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, a Democrat, has just been indicted. Let's talk about that on our next stop, New York. A 57-page indictment was just unsealed, and now we know what Mayor Eric Adams is being charged with. Bribery, a campaign contribution scheme, and more. Adams is 64 years old and a former police captain. Allegedly, he received more than $10 million in public matching funds for campaign contributions from Turkish businessmen, and he tried to hide it. Here's what a part of the indictment says. Starting in 2014 and thereafter, for nearly a decade, Adams sought and accepted improper valuable benefits, such as luxury international travel, including from wealthy foreign business people and at least one Turkish government official seeking to gain influence over him. By 2018, Adams, who had by then made known his plans to run for mayor of New York City, not only accepted but sought illegal campaign contributions to his 2021 mayoral campaign, as well as other things of value from foreign nationals. As Adams' prominence and power grew, his foreign national benefactors sought to cash in on their corrupt relationships with him, particularly when in 2021 it became clear that Adams would become New York City's mayor. Adams agreed, providing favorable treatment in exchange for the illicit benefits he received. After his inauguration as mayor of New York City, Adams soon began preparing for his next election, including by planning to solicit more illegal contributions and granting requests from those who supported his 2021 mayoral campaign with such donations. He's charged in the indictment with one count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, federal program bribery, and to receive campaign contributions by a foreign national. Allegedly, he is the second New York mayor to be criminally charged while still in office. According to Adams' lawyer, he has not been arrested and looks forward to his day in court. He feels it was unnecessary to send a dozen agents to pick up a phone when all they had to do was ask and they would have turned it in. Well, that's what happens when you're federally indicted. Previously, Adams said if he were charged, the charges would be false and based on lies. Adams also said, if I am charged, I am innocent and will fight this with every ounce of my strength and spirit. Keep in mind, this is only his first term in office, and many people are calling for him to resign. Now, he hasn't been declared a criminal yet, but let me tell you who is. Trump. Trump was found guilty on 34 felony counts. To the ones who question whether a woman is fit to lead the U.S., allow me to ask you a question. I've talked about 4 men today. Are men in positions of power doing any better for this country? As racist, self-hating, and misogynistic as they are, why is there still a question about Kamala Harris? You have people like Janet Jackson making ignorant comments about her race. She heard her father was white. Kamala Harris's father is Donald J. Harris. He is Jamaican American. There should be no confusion about that. It was beyond irresponsible, and I'll say it again, ignorant of her to make those comments. And if she really didn't know, she should have stayed quiet. It's 2024, and we still have people Harriet Tubman would have left behind. Disgraceful. I have been a fan of Janet Jackson's since Control, but after she opened up her mouth and spread such ignorance, not anymore. To perpetuate GOP rhetoric spits on all of the contributions made by the people who came before us. Do you think Fannie Lou Hamer stood up at a podium with her hair perfectly done and smelling good and earned the right to vote for Black people in this country? No. Let me tell you something about Fannie Lou Hamer. This woman suffered consequences in advocating for civil rights. This woman was beaten almost to death. This happened on June 9th, 1963. She and other civil rights activists were arrested in Winona, Mississippi, after they returned from a voter education workshop in South Carolina. They had been traveling in the white section of a Greyhound bus, and when the bus arrived at Staley's Cafe, the activists tried to eat there, but were refused service. According to Mrs. Hamer, she got off the bus and was attacked by a white police officer who started kicking her and then arrested her. And she described what happened to her in great detail. According to Mrs. Hamer, it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrolman, and he asked me where I was from. I told him Ruleville, and he said, "We're going to check into this." They left my cell, and it wasn't too long before they came back. He said, "You're from Ruleville, all right," and used a cuss word. And he said, "We're going to make you wish you was dead." Then the white officers forced 2 Black prisoners, male, to beat Mrs. Hamer with loaded blackjacks. They almost killed her. Can you imagine being beaten by a man with a blackjack? Her head wasn't avoided. Her breasts weren't avoided. Her back was not avoided. They beat her everywhere. They beat her until she lost consciousness. And when she came to, she heard them say, "We could put them SOBs in the big black river and nobody would ever find them." What did she get for her activism? Permanent kidney damage. Can you imagine how severely you have to be beaten to suffer damage to your kidneys? She filed a lawsuit against the Winona police, but an all-white jury acquitted them. Even after this, she returned to Mississippi and continued organizing and continued to be an activist for civil rights. That's why I have no patience for Black people, especially Black women who say, "I'm not voting for Kamala Harris." You are a cancer in our race. You spit on the memory of Fannie Lou Hamer. Mrs. Hamer died in 1977. She was 59 years old. This is what Trump and the conservatives mean when they say they want to make America great again. They're fine with people like Mark Robinson and Clay Higgins, as long as they don't say in public what they believe behind closed doors. Do you actually think these GOP leaders are distancing themselves from Robinson because they don't believe in what he's saying? Of course they do. But they know as soon as these radical, crazy, racist, misogynistic ideas hit the public, it makes them look bad. And there's a reason for that. They are bad. And I'm not about to let anybody gaslight me and say, "Oh, you're causing division." Let me tell you something beautiful about gaslighting. When people know that you're hitting home, and when they don't want to hear what you have to say, they try to turn it around on you. In politics, there's no way you can vote for both parties. You have to choose a side. And if you are not choosing the side where people can be free to read books and make decisions about their own bodies? The problem doesn't lie in what I'm saying. The problem exists in your head. For me, it's a no-brainer. I don't want people in power who feel they should have the right to tell women what to do with their bodies. I also don't agree that books should be banned. Terry McMillan, James Baldwin, Amy Tan, and Agatha Christie are all authors who have had their books banned. In just 1 year, 10,000 books have been banned. And out of all the states in this country, Florida and Iowa are the ringleaders. Conservatives have targeted books about romance, rape, or sexual abuse. Conservatives are specifically targeting books by women of color. Let me hip you to the game. Amy Tan wrote a book about the Chinese American daughter of an immigrant mother. It's called The Kitchen God's Wife. Terry McMillan's novel, How Stella Got Her Groove Back, was also a movie in the 90s. Ellen O wrote a novel inspired by her mother's experiences during the Korean War. It's called Finding Junie Kim. And Julia Alvarez's novel, How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents, is about 4 immigrant sisters from the Dominican Republic. You just heard me say conservatives believe anyone who looks and thinks like them owns this country. But that's not true. This country also belongs to women of color. Let's take a look at some history. The history conservatives don't want you to know. Now, the 19th Amendment gave some women the right to vote. It was adopted nationally on August 26, 1920. But guess what? Women of color were still denied the right to vote. In 1920, Native Americans weren't allowed to be United States citizens, so the federal amendment did not give them the right to vote. It wasn't until 1924, with the passage of the Snyder Act, that American-born Native women gained citizenship. But guess what? They were still blocked from voting. Literacy tests, poll taxes, and idiotic claims that residence on a reservation meant one wasn't also a resident of that state stopped Native American women from voting. And if you know nothing about this piece of Black history, you're going to find out today. It wasn't until the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that Black women were allowed to vote without barriers. Yeah, our ancestors were also subjected to literacy tests, poll taxes, intimidation, threats, and murder. Let's talk about Latinas. They were also hit with literacy tests. That's right. Women who spoke Spanish as their first language did not get the right to vote until 1975, when an extension of the Voting Rights Act prohibited discrimination against women who did not use English as their first language. You heard me right, 1975. Let's talk about Asian American women. Now, they had U.S. citizenship in 1920 if they were born here. But first-generation Asian American immigrant women did not. Asian American immigrant women were excluded from voting until the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 allowed them to gain citizenship. That was 32 years after the 19th Amendment passed. We must never forget the brave women who fought for women to have the right to vote. For Asian American women, it was Dr. Mabel Ping Hua Lee. Zidkala Sa advocated for Native American women. Fannie Lou Hamer and Diane Nash won the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 for Black women to have the right to vote. In Puerto Rico, Luisa Capetillo advocated for Latina women having the right to vote. Let me take you back to Asian American women for a minute. 1952 was your year. Now it's 2024, and we have half of an Asian American woman running for the office of president in this country. She is half you and half of us, Black women. People in this country denied you the right to vote. They denied Black women the right to vote. There should be no question in supporting Kamala Harris to be the next president of our country. Past injustices are not dead in this country. They are alive and well. Trump and J.D. Vance want to make them loud and clear. Let me give you an example. Let's take a detour back to my state, North Carolina. Javion McGee was a 21-year-old truck driver who died in Henderson, North Carolina. Vance County Police claimed it was suicide, but the family and their attorney say, Harry Daniels represents the family, and he said, for any suggestion that it was suicide, anybody stating it was suicide would be grossly premature. We do know a young black man was hanging from a tree in North Carolina. Police found McGee sitting at the base of a tree in Henderson with a blue rope around his neck on September 11th. Here's what's suspicious to me. An anonymous caller told 911 he had been mowing grass in the area with some other men when he saw a man who hung himself in a tree. Now, did he witness him hanging himself in a tree? The wording is suspicious to me. Curtis Brame is the sheriff of Vance County, and he said that McGee's autopsy showed no signs of defensive wounds or physical abuse. Now, this went viral on TikTok. And to be truthful, that's the only good thing about TikTok, that stories like this that would have otherwise been buried get amplified. The woman who posted the video doesn't believe McGee hung himself, and neither do I. Sheriff Brame said, there is not a lynching. The young man was not dangling from a tree. He was not swinging from a tree. The rope was wrapped around his neck. It was not a noose. Here's what McGee did one day prior to his death. He was caught on video giving $228 to a homeless person, and he bought a rope. Now, this is the reason they're saying he committed suicide, because he bought the rope. But listen, he was a truck driver. They use rope for various things all the time. McGee worked out of Chicago. He came to Vance County because he was working. Vance County was on his delivery route. According to the attorney, he was going to visit his cousins in Houston. Lee Merritt is a national civil rights attorney, and he said, I don't know too many gainfully employed, happy 21-year-olds who drive to Vance County and kill themselves. Spot on. Here's something else that's suspicious. The family was called and told that their son committed suicide, but they didn't have a chance to see the pictures or even identify the body until that Wednesday. McGee tried to get a room at the Hampton Inn in Henderson, but it was full. So he stayed at the trailer repair yard about a half a mile from Walmart, where other truckers were staying with him. Now just imagine being a young black man alone in a city you're unfamiliar with, and you're forced to sleep in the middle of nowhere, out in the open. According to Daniels, the pictures show McGee attached to a branch 7 or 8 feet high. But he said the young man was killed not in the manner you would see in the 60s or the 20s or the 30s. To me, that doesn't matter. A hanging is a hanging. It doesn't matter to me if McGee was swinging or sitting. He didn't put that rope around his neck. McGee's parents were at the press conference, and they gave thanks for many supporting them and praying for them. Corey McGee is Javion's father, and he said Javion followed him into the trucking trade despite seeing ups and downs in the business, and he was very competitive and wanted to put in work. That means he was ambitious. At 21 years old, he had his whole life ahead of him. His father said, if I could tap into him, I would say he's wanted this country to come together. If there wasn't a divide, this wouldn't have happened. And that is spot on. There is a divide in this country. On one side, you have people who believe that people are inferior to them based on skin color. They also believe women do not have the right to decide what happens with their bodies. And they also believe we, especially our children, yours and mine, do not have the right to be educated in public schools, and they do not have the right to read. They feel it's perfectly okay for you to carry a rapist's baby, but they don't want you to read about rape. You can have free speech as long as you don't quote it from a book they don't want you to read. And on the other side, You have people who believe in democracy and freedom for everyone, not just some. The other side believes in having access to health care. It believes in saving the lives of women who would otherwise die if they had a baby. It believes in IVF treatment for families who are unable to conceive on their own. And it also believes you have the right to pick up a book and learn about anything you want to concerning the United States and abroad. Let me give you another morsel of U.S. history. An anti-lynching bill was introduced for the first time in 1900 by Representative George Henry White. He represented this state, North Carolina. He was a black Republican. But get this, I don't want you to get confused and think George Henry White was the same kind of black Republican as Mark Robinson. You see, that's another gaslighting tactic conservatives try to use. Republican and Democratic parties flipped ideologies. Let me explain. It used to be that the Republican Party was considered liberal, and Democrats were known for being conservative. Here's where the change began. After the Civil War, the Republican Party controlled the government and used its power to protect formerly enslaved people and guarantee them civil rights. However, Northern industrialists started entering politics. And these new wealthy politicians didn't see the value of supporting the rights of Black Americans when the nation was still predominantly white. So by the 1870s, many in the Republican Party felt that they had done enough for Black citizens and pulled out all efforts to reform the South. The South was then left to white Democrats and their oppressive policies towards Black citizens. And almost 60 years later, the Great Depression became the major catalyst for a massive political shakeup. The Republican Party continued to be dominated by wealthy businessmen. When the economy crashed in 1929, Herbert Hoover, who was a Republican president, didn't intervene. Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was a Democrat, did. He campaigned on a promise of government intervention, financial assistance, and concern for the welfare of the people. In 1932, he won the election by a landslide. It was the campaign policies of Franklin Delano Roosevelt that caused a major shift in the parties. Moving on to 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson, a Democrat, signed the Civil Rights Act into law. Barry Goldwater, a Republican, opposed the new law and said that it expanded the power of the federal government to a dangerous level. It was this argument that led to a final decisive switch. Black voters who had historically been loyal to the Republican Party because of the 1866 Civil Rights Act had already been switching to the Democratic Party. So, when people say, well, it was the Republicans who supported Black people if you look up history. If you don't know history, somebody's going to come along and give you a twisted version. You have to research what has happened in this country for yourself. Don't let these social media posts tell you anything. There's a lot of people who love getting on social media posting about politics. But guess what? They've never read the U.S. Constitution. Some of them don't read at all. They don't read books or journals or spell properly. They sit and watch Fox News all day. They sit and watch Donald Trump and allow him to dictate what is truth in this country. If you think Trump has read the Constitution, you better think again. Clay Higgins is a congressman, and he believes that Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, are actually eating pets. Trump's supporters believe it too. That is a dangerous rhetoric. To perpetuate a lie about an entire culture is beyond soulless. So that, dear listeners, is how Republicans and Democrats switched. Now let's get back to this anti-lynching bill. As I said, it was introduced in 1900. Do you know when it was passed? 2022. 122 years later, President Biden signed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act into law. If you don't know who Emmett Till was, he was 14 when he was beaten to death by two grown white men who were later acquitted of his murder. This happened in 1955. When he signed the bill, President Biden said lynching was a pure terror to enforce the lie that not everyone belongs in America. Not everyone is created equal. Racial hate isn't an old problem. It's a persistent problem. Hate never goes away. It only hides. I just finished telling you, Trump and J.D. Vance and the rest of the conservatives want to uncover this. This is what they want to bring back to this country. This is their idea, to make America great again. If you can find one good thing about lynching, I'd be willing to hear you out. But guess what? You won't. I don't care what anybody says. A lynching is what happened to Javion McGee right here on September 11th, 2024. Javion McGee did not travel to Vance County, North Carolina to hang himself. He came to do a job, and his life was stolen from him. No young black man is going to hang himself, especially in a red state. Come on now. But if conservatives have their way, you would never know this history. That's how they want it. But that's not how it should be. For me, there is no question. If you are undecided at this time, I question why. Why is there a question between supporting a man convicted of 34 charges and a prosecutor? A law-abiding citizen who worked her way up from the prosecutor's office to the office of Vice President of the United States. If you are undecided, ask yourselves why. And with that, I'm out of time. If you learned anything from today's episode, feel free to follow me. By now you know where. Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, Samsung, iHeartRadio, and more. Hurricane Helene is coming, people, and North Carolina is expected to get some of her fury. So I went ahead and recorded this episode early so that I could get it out to you. If you live in Florida, keep yourself safe. And shout out to the new countries who have joined the Amerisogyny podcast, Qatar and Russia. We thank you so much for listening. I will be back with more stories. Until then, be easy, have a good weekend, take care of yourselves, and as always, God